Hey, what's up everybody? Video 44 coming at you with another video. All right. So, of course, everything that's on my mind right now is a draft. It's draft related basically. And, for me, I'm just trying to get more and more familiar with the names and the players and what they can do in the first round. I'm not really interested in too many players in the second round, but by way of studying the first round, you probably will have some guys at the beginning of the second round that'll fall. And maybe some guys that I'm not paying attention to that'll pull up. Brayer Shireman is a name that I'm hearing a lot, whose stock could potentially be rising. Jurasic, I believe is his name. His stock could potentially be rising. So I need to see a little homework on those particular players. There's a player out of Weber State. I've heard Dame Lillard say Weber State, so I'm not really sure exactly how to say it, but multiple mocks have called it Weber. But if I'm not mistaken, didn't Dame go there? He calls it Weber State in one of the songs that he raps. So, I don't know. Whatever the case may be, it could fall. I know it's two different schools, but there is a player there whose name is also starting to come around. I don't know what the name is now that I think about it, but I remember the school and I remember the player. And to me, it seems like his stock should be rising based on the stats that he's putting up. So, as I said before, certain guys' stock are falling because of the schools that they go to, in my opinion. And we'll have to then wow in the combine in order to get their stock up to where it needs to be, or do well in these workouts to kind of get a team to fall in love with them, because of the politics of it all. Now, I don't know how true this is, but Nikola Topic, arguably the best pure point guard in this draft, he's dealing with a knee injury that we know for a fact, but from what I understand, it could be a partially torn ACL. And if that's the case, that could drop his stock dramatically, especially if he's going to need surgery on it. So the knee injury can be confirmed. But as far as how bad it is, that's hearsay at this point. I saw it in someone that commented on a mock draft that I was watching that said that he has a partially teared MCL or something like that. So hopefully that is not true. But we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, his stock, man, his stock could fall. But to be honest with you, even with a knee injury, there are certain teams who have 2 picks, like Portland and San Antonio, who probably should consider taking him anyway, to be honest with you, because he's such an elite facilitator, and some of these teams really need that right now. I think of a team like the Washington Wizards. It's a little too rich to take him at 2, especially with a knee injury, but I would not be mad at them for finding a way to get him. Maybe if they trade down, they'd probably be more responsible for the value of the pick. But he's a hell of a player, man. He should be taken by that team, in my opinion. I think of another team like San Antonio who could definitely use a facilitator. Maybe they have their eyes on other guards, but they should not be out on a point guard. And I'll tell you this. As I've talked a lot about point guards that I like, specifically point guard at the back of the draft, the first round rather. What's that guy's name? Caucasian dude, point guard. I think the Phoenix Suns should consider taking him at 22. Now I know it's a lot of rumors about them taking Bronny. There's been some rumors that they want a big, but they don't need anything more than they need a point guard. So if they can find a way to get a point guard at the end of this draft, maybe it'd be Bub Carrington. Maybe it'd be the other guy whose name is not coming to mind as usual for me lately. But they should consider taking a facilitating point guard so they can actually facilitate to Bradley Beal, to Kevin Durant, to Devin Booker, to the other guys. So, they're expected to do weird stuff just in general because of who their owner is and how he's been moving lately. Maybe they used to pick on Bronny. But the more I study this draft, the less I feel it's likely Bronny gets drafted in the first round. Now, the Lakers taking him at 55 in the second round, even that, the more I study, the less I feel confident that that's something that should be done. You could take a flyer on a guy in a bad draft, but once you start paying attention to who's actually in that draft, then it's like, should they really pass up on real prospects? Should they really pass up on some of these guys in the second round who do have upside so that you can take a player that you're going to have to wait on when you're a win-now team? A guy who's only 6'1", but can't facilitate an offense necessarily? I mean, I just don't think that I don't need to do that. Now, granted, you can find guys, the same guys you're going to take at 55. If you don't draft them, the odds are pretty decent that you find them in the undrafted market. You understand what I mean? So it's like, once you start getting into 55s and 56, you can either draft guys or not draft guys. The odds of guys that you're paying attention to getting drafted aren't very high once you get back there. Especially with some of the picks are actually forfeited and stuff went wrong. So there's only like 56, 57 picks in this draft anyway. So it's one of those situations where, because I understand that, I probably am going to leave Bronny on the board and take my chances to see if anybody doesn't draft him. And if they don't, just bring him in as an undrafted prospect and kind of get one of those more quote-unquote sexy names, or fulfill myself a need with the 55th pick. Because I'm telling y'all, man, it's a lot of talk about Bronny going in the first round, but the reality is, once you start really digging into these players, they can't really sell you that. You know, before I started doing homework on the first round, you could sell me on the idea of actually taking Bronny in the first round. Now that I know just about who everybody is and what all they can do, hell no, you can't sell me on taking Bronny James in the first round. It's not a chance. Not even in this draft am I doing that. He's just not one of those prospects, and he's not at the top of the second round either. Not based on what the other players who are on the board can do. It just is what it is, man. So that's kind of what I want to say, man. I don't think you're going to see Bronny get drafted any time before 55 by the Lakers. Now, if the Lakers do it, it's fine. I would prefer the Lakers not. And if they are going to do something like that, I prefer for them to buy another first-round pick. Maybe use cash considerations to take one of OKC's picks or something random like that. I guess one second-round pick to another, it doesn't really matter. But because we only have 2 picks and have several needs, I genuinely think I can fulfill some of my needs in this draft. You know, there's a guy on the back of the second round that's one of the most athletic 2 guards we've seen. I don't know what the hell his name is because I've only heard it once. But I saw a glimpse of what he could do as I was watching the mock draft. I'm like, holy crap. You think that is real. You need to really study these prospects. And the Lakers, hopefully they bring as many of them in as possible so they know what their true options are. Don't take hearsay for it in regards to, this is a crappy draft, you can afford to throw a pick away. Not if you know your scouts are good, because if your scouts are good, they're going to find something. They're going to find something. And so that's why I would tell LeBron James, brace yourself for the idea of a real war in the war room about whether or not to take your son. Because if this team is being absolutely as responsible as I believe they should be, that should not be an easy decision for them to make. Even if they've already agreed to it. It shouldn't be an easy decision to make. Because at the end of the day, there are some guys at the back of this draft, this quote-unquote bad draft, that I think are going to be good role players. Some good ones. Like, guys that have intangibles, and I think they will be pros. Now, granted, most of the second round, most years, are guys that end up in the G League, overseas. This draft is probably no different than that. But I think the odds of you striking gold in a draft like this where everybody thinks it's a bad draft is pretty decent, man. I think it's pretty decent you can strike gold with some of them guys on the back of that draft. Some real strong centers, some decent wings, etc. They got them in the back of this thing. So as I left I got to correct a mistake or a potential mistake. I think yesterday I was saying that the Portland Trailblazers could fulfill their small forward position with guys like Brandon Ingram and Paul George. Those guys are free agents. So that should have been different names or signing trades, as to which you're less likely to get a sign and trade from a team like the Clippers in this situation. And more so, Portland is less likely to probably agree to a sign and trade for a free agent that has them giving up picks. So I just want to make that clear. I do think those players could potentially be on the move, but probably under their own idea of doing things, prerogative or whatever. Not necessarily in a trade situation. So, we'll see how that goes. But at the end of the day, some of the teams that they may want to end up on and vice versa may have to give up salary in order to do that. So I do think it's a decent chance you see it sign and trade with some of these free agents, just simply to facilitate the path to some of these teams that these guys may want to go to. Some of them could be replacing one another. So a guy like Brandon Ingram could be replacing Paul George in the Clipperland at some point. So that wouldn't surprise me too much. So these are the type of things we're thinking about when we talk about last night's video with the Portland Trailblazers having 2 picks and being in a strange range to where they probably gonna have to take a point guard to get the most out of their value. I don't think it's necessary that they pass on a Ron Holland if they have him up the draft. But if a Rob Dillingham is still on the board, maybe you don't necessarily feel as comfortable taking Holland over Dillingham if your draft board is looking like mine. But the chance that Dillingham is still on the board right now, if you're the Portland Trailblazers at 7, it's pretty damn high. So what do? Do you bring him to a situation with Anthony Simons, obviously Scoot Henderson, Malcolm Brogdon? You're gonna bring another leading guard in that situation? It's probably going to be a little bit of a headache if you don't make some moves anyway. So I don't know. I don't know about that. I think it might be smart for the Portland Trailblazers to try to deal that 7th pick to move up or down depending on what they want. Zachary Risache's draft stock at the moment is a little all over the place. He can go anywhere between 1 and 4 right now. But if I'm San Antonio and I luck out in getting him at 4, I think that's a fantastic fit for the guy, especially if they can use that 2nd pick at 8 to take a point guard. They can get a Dillingham and pair him up with Risache. Now you're talking about Risache, obviously Wemby, Dillingham, Johnson, Vassell. That's a really nice team, man. That's a really nice team. Sohan, of whom I think they should probably move. I think they should move Sohan, but the idea is if you bring in Risache, you have a lot of length there with him and Wemby obviously in place together. You got a building block for the future. So I don't know if San Antonio values Risache for their situation as much as I would, but I'll tell you this. If I'm the Washington Wizards and I don't love Risache, but I do love Topic, I probably don't mind trading down to the Spurs, take 4, take something else with 4, give them 2, take the guy you want, they take the guy they want. That seems like a reasonable thing to do. That seems very reasonable to me. So I think, not to say that I've heard any rumors, but just in my mind's eye, that makes a lot of sense to me. If I'm trying to get the most of what my picks are worth, given if I'm the Washington Wizards, and if I'm trying to get the most of a situation where probably the guy that I think most fits their situation doesn't fall to them, and maybe they just don't absolutely love the other guys. The chances Risache falls to 4 is pretty decent, though. I'm not going to lie to you. If he doesn't go 1 to Atlanta, which it looks like Sarr is going to go number 1, I do reasonably think that the Washington Wizards have their eyes on other prospects. It just makes sense for them. You know, when you start talking about why you don't want to take Risache at 2, it's because you don't have a facilitator like Topic. Maybe if you don't find bad news for Topic's injury, maybe you take Topic. Maybe if you love Shepherd as much as a lot of people do, including myself, maybe you take Shepherd at 2. I think Shepherd could be the most talented player in this entire draft, to be honest with you. Now, his height and his arm length doesn't provide you a whole lot of hope, but I wouldn't be surprised if this dude is as good as Isaiah Thomas, the second one. I wouldn't be surprised because he's so fantastic shooting the ball. He's very good facilitating the ball, and then he's like a gifted defensive player for his height. So you're talking about a two-way guy who doesn't miss literally at all. And while I know the Houston Rockets would love for him to fall to them, if I'm the Washington Wizards, I'm working that dude out. Because if I'm not in love with Risache, I need a point guard. And if Topic is going to be hurt, he might be the next best thing. Now, granted, some say Dillingham might be the next best thing. Okay, but I'm definitely considering bringing in both of those guys. I'm definitely thinking about bringing both of them in if I'm the Washington Wizards. So that's what I want to say to you guys, man. I think the Washington Wizards are in an interesting spot, just like the Portland Trailblazers. And trading their pick might not be entirely the worst thing in the world. Maybe even they trade up with the Atlanta Hawks. I heard someone throw that idea out there. If they really love Sarr, and they're certain that the Hawks will take Sarr unless they trade the pick to him, and maybe Atlanta doesn't care if they get Sarr or Risache, maybe it makes a whole lot of sense to try to get the most for the number 1 pick by trading it down to number 2, take a future from the Washington Wizards, and then let them have Sarr and you take Risache, of whom you would probably take with the first pick any damn way. That's the way you capture value for these picks. A lot of teams like to reach. I wouldn't reach for anything without first considering the idea that I could trade the pick down. Never reach for nothing. If I know my guy that I really like is in the 20 range and I got to pick 17 like the Lakers, why wouldn't I try to call Cleveland? Why wouldn't I try to call some of these teams that have that range? First, you got to get the landscape going to see and make sure that people don't want the player you want between where you're at and where you're going. But after you figure out the landscape and how things look, if you don't mind taking the risk, you can really get more futures for your pick and still get the guy you want. And for teams that have already mortgaged so much of their future, like Phoenix, teams like the Lakers have already traded so many picks, why wouldn't you try to capture the value of a pick if it can mean you getting a couple extra seconds or maybe even a first rounder or something like that? Or a nice player, you know? Some of these teams really do need to be sticklers for value in that regard because of what they've given up. And I just don't see enough of that in this league. I don't see enough of that. I see too many people willing to reach without first valuing the pick itself. Oh, I like this guy. Cool, trade down. Even if it's one spot, you can get yourself a second rounder or get yourself a role player or something. Capture that value. Get some cash considerations if you don't want to take back a player, but capture that value. You know, so that's something I think the NBA should do, especially since it's so very difficult to maneuver around the way things are right now with this collective bargaining agreement. It makes it so very difficult for teams to find an opportunity to really build in a way that quite honestly makes any sense. It's very complicated math. So if I can capture the value of a pick or capture the value of a player by trading down or trading up, maybe that's the move. Maybe you have a million futures and you're probably going to run out anyway, like Utah. They're probably going to hold your futures if you don't draft all of them and you don't see a path to paying everybody. Slap two of them things together and trade up. Trade this year's pick and next year's pick for a better next year's pick or something like that. That way you can capture the value for everything. Because you can find yourself in a situation like the Oklahoma City Thunder were a couple years ago, where you're waiving players that you genuinely like because you have so many picks and so many people to pay that you can't keep all the talent. That's a real thing. So rather than to let that happen, smash two of those picks together, trade them for one, and then put yourself in the best possible position to capture the value. So it's just not enough of that going on in the NBA. I don't know how the complications of the collective bargaining agreement that maybe could get in the way of that. But if all things are on the up and up, there should be no reason you can't do that. And it's smart. It's very smart for teams, especially if you know the guys that you like are not in your range. If you know the guys you like are not in your range, get the value for the pick that you deserve. You know what I mean? Especially if you're a gambling team like Phoenix and Clippers and Lakers and all of them. Brooklyn, you need to start valuing value for everything. And I'm going to say something else when it comes to Brooklyn. This is going to sound like a far cry from what I usually think. I think Mikal Bridges is worth more than the third overall pick. Not to say that I can't involve the third overall pick in a Mikal Bridges trade, but if that's the only thing of value that Houston's sending me, I'm not doing that deal. As bad as I need my picks back, you're going to have to give me more than that for Mikal Bridges. I'm just going to be honest with you, because Mikal Bridges has a lot of demand around the league. And this draft, even though I value it, overall the consensus does not value this draft very much. So if you trade crappy salary match plus third overall pick, you're kind of getting fleeced for what I think Mikal Bridges is going to be over the next several years. They're kind of getting fleeced. Now, I think Brooklyn does need to make some moves, and maybe they love a player at the top of the draft that much. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about is a team that's lacking in assets, capturing value for everything they have. So you can still find a way, a very creative way to get the player that you love without actually messing up your value. And another thing I tell people is this: if you know a guy is going to take 2 and 3 years to develop, and you really, really like this player, you probably do better waiting a year. Let him get drafted to somebody else's team. And then see, don't the value it costs to get him today come down so much more than it will be tomorrow, is what I'm trying to say. Tomorrow, that value of that player is going to be so much less because he's not a overwhelmingly great draft pick today if this is a year later. He's a guy who probably had a quiet rookie season, and you can go back and get him for half the price. So we've seen that so many times. You look at a guy like Scoot Henderson and what his value is right now. Now, granted, the Portland Trailblazers probably value him just the same as they did on draft night. But the point is, he had such a bad rookie season to now, if I'm a team like Charlotte and I want to get him, it probably don't cost as much as it did last year around draft time. It certainly don't cost as much as it would have when he was the second overall pick before the draft started. So that's the type of long-term thinking that a team needs to have when they love a prospect, but don't necessarily find it feasible for them to receive him in the draft. Wait a year. Wait a year. See what he becomes after a year. If you know he's a project that needs to develop, then he ain't going to do a whole lot that first year in theory. You can go back and get him for half the price next year when the team is kind of down on him. Or even if they're not down on him, if you're willing to move enough, you can get him for less. So that doesn't always work. I'm not going to sit here and say that's a perfect theory or nothing like that. It's not. But there are going to be instances where that is the case. Very much so. Especially if a guy has a bad rookie season. And when you don't have any plans for him to play right away anyway, you don't have to draft him now. Wait a year. So these are the type of things we're thinking about, man. Now, there's another team that I've been thinking a lot about. This is my very own favorite team, the Los Angeles Lakers. I hear that they might be trying to trade the pick for marketing. As I said, if we can make a salary match plus 17, I'm not going to have a problem with that. But if we're talking about trading away any futures from here, next year's, or the year after that rather, I don't know about putting in too many picks for marketing, and I don't think I'm going to win the bid because of it. So the Lakers are going to have to pony up more than probably I'm willing to bring him to this team. And even though his contract is very cost effective, you still can do other things if you get him. Because of that, it's worth more. Because of that, you're probably going to have to give Danny Ainge more than you want to give him. And it's Danny Ainge we're talking about. He's not going to give you anything you want just because you want it and you have the salary match. He's never going to go for that. You're going to have to give up something you don't want to give up, or you're going to have to deal with the fact that you're going to have to give up picks and players. And so that's really my point of view. Do you want to give up picks and players for marketing? And if the answer is yes, do you understand what it is that you're actually giving up, as we've talked about many times on this channel? Potential years that you may not be very good, where the pick that you're giving up right now could potentially be really good. Once it gets in that lottery, it can shake up a million different ways. All you got to have is a miss the playoffs type of season for you to get the first overall pick. Look at the Hawks. The Hawks won the first overall draft pick, and they were a play-in tournament team. So don't be so sure that just because your team is not so bad that the pick won't be so good. Because the lottery is not based on the teams being, the worst teams get the best pick anymore. That thing shakes up a different way. The odds are different now. Over the last 2 years, they changed that. 3 years, rather. So that's why I'm like, look, the Lakers missing the playoffs is not crazy. The Lakers being in a play-in tournament has been our reality for the last 3-4 years. All things got to do is shake up a certain way, and you're giving the first overall pick to the team you traded to. Be certain that you're not trading away so much value in the event that you're gambling that way. Because once that pick turns out to be number one overall, you didn't trade it away 4 and 5 times more than what you probably thought you were. Which is why I don't really like the idea of trading future picks. I don't know what that pick's going to be. I don't know what type of season we're going to have. So if I'm trading away picks all willy-nilly, and this turns into an Atlanta type situation, not only did I have a not so good year, but I'm giving a team that's probably really good the first overall pick. That's nothing I'm ever going to think makes sense. I'm going to have to take back significantly more than what you likely want me to take back in order for me to be willing to take a risk like that. I'm going to want to work in some of that value into the trade itself. That what if value. I'm going to want something else than probably what you're going to be willing to give me for that pick. So I'd like Rob Pelinka to think that way, especially since we've mortgaged so much already. Nice star like marketing is cool, bro. He really is. But I don't want to get into a bidding war where I'm doing 4 and 5 more than I can just because other people can outbid me for this player. Hell no. Not in our circumstance. But the pressure of doing things for LeBron James could potentially put you in a position to be doing something really, really tough on your cap and on your situation. And I just find that to be something I'm not willing to do. But That's what it is. Now, if I were a team with a lot of picks, I wouldn't have a problem, especially if I'm Utah, OKC, New York, teams that have a plethora of picks. Yeah, you can do that. But for teams that don't have that, probably not the move. Probably not the move. Now, for teams like Utah, maybe Utah is a good example. They don't have a superstar. Maybe they need to be more value savvy with their picks because they don't have that superstar. I have to take into account that if the Lakers were to choose to trade Anthony Davis, you can get a lot of picks back. But at the end of the day, Anthony Davis particularly is one injury away from not being worth all that, and then suddenly you're in a bad position. If those picks are diversified instead of all wrapped up in one guy, then in theory, I likely can do so much more with it if I'm making good trades. So these are the type of things that I want the Lakers specifically to consider, man, given our situation and the fact that we won't want to trade Anthony Davis. You will not want to trade Anthony Davis. So that means his value is not going to be captured, but you are responsible for keeping good stuff around him. And LeBron James, of course, can retire and leave us for nothing in that way. So all of this is important to me. We need to really consider about everything that we're saying here. JJ Redick looks like he's going to be the coach. Last thing I heard is the Lakers were zeroing in on him, which is, in other words, it would take a miracle for the guy runner-up to take the job from JJ at this point. JJ's starting to, he's doing his best not to hint that he's gotten the job, and in doing so, he's hinting that he got the job, that kind of thing. So, it's all but announced at this point. And JJ himself said that with all the stuff that's going around, his focus is to do all the TV stuff right now. NBA Finals, Old Man in the Three, Mind the Game, all that stuff is most important right now. And after all of that is done, after the NBA Finals is done, then he will be able to address all of the rumors about what's being said by Shams, which is that the Lakers are zeroing in on him and that they're already starting to establish his coaching staff. Now, the coaching staff is being established, but they don't have guarantees on any of that, but they're starting to make calls from what I understand. The names that I'm hearing are names we've already talked about: Rondo, Dudley, Cassell, Borrego, and another guy, St. Jean or something. I don't know who that coach is, but that's the names that I've been hearing as of late. And there was one more name too, Scotty Brooks, used to be the OKC Thunder coach. I think Scotty's going to be very important for us because he's the only guy who has head coaching experience. So if things go crazy, it's likely Scotty that we would expect to be the next guy up, I think. But I do believe that they said Borrego would be the head assistant. So I don't know how that's going to set up. But for me and my money, if crap goes to the fan, if things go absolutely wrong, at least we know we got Scotty Brooks down there who's head coached for many years in this league. And I think that's one of the most important aspects of what we got here. So I like it. I like the brain trust, man. We got some smart people down there. JJ Redick is intelligent. I watched the latest Mind the Game podcast with him and Bron talking about the finals. I continue to be impressed with JJ Redick. His mind, his overall synergy, his creativity, and his opinion about basketball and how things should be done. It's incredible. It's incredible, really. I think he's definitely a guy that you can expect will provide great plays and just an overall good recognition for what he's looking at on a basketball floor. Now, how he handles pressure situations, we can harken back to how he handled his NBA career. He seemed pretty good under pressure. So that makes me think that he's not going to be wetting the bed if things go crazy. We're talking about one of the best role-playing shooters of his generation. And I think that could translate to him being a good shooting coach as well, in theory. It's not like, he's going to see a guy having some ridiculous form and not be able to give him key pointers that dude can listen to. So, that is important. Also, like the idea of putting shooters on his team. We're going to see how he reacts to shooters that don't shoot very well if that happens, because at the end of the day, he is a very good shooter himself. And if guys aren't hitting shots, we've seen in situations where guys are really good at stuff, losing confidence or getting frustrated with people who are not so good at stuff. That's why great players don't often make great coaches, because they think the game comes as easy to others as it came to them. So that's been one thing that's always been a thing in the NBA with some of these superstar guys that have turned into coaches. But I don't think JJ is disconnected. He's been a role player. He's not a star in this league, so he should be able to connect with guys and gain the respect of guys that will need to be given some special attention in order to get the most out of them. And I think that that's an important connecting trait for a head coach. So I'm pretty excited. I think the excited is a little more extra on top of what it is, but I like the idea of bringing this guy in. He's a smart coach. Sounds like he's putting together a pretty good coaching staff behind the scenes. We get to see his mind on display on multiple platforms every day. And I think he took well to media. He works hard, clearly. He's consistent, clearly. So all of these different traits, he's not only interviewing for our team, but he's interviewing so that the whole world can see his work ethic. And I think that holds a lot of weight in him having so much, having the interest of the Los Angeles Lakers organization. So I like JJ for what we're doing. If not for the failure of Darvin Ham as a rookie coach, I would prefer the Lakers do exactly what they're doing. And given the fact that we don't want to overcompensate, I'm fine with what the Lakers are doing. And what I mean by that is, when you have a situation where a guy just failed being a certain way, you steer clear of every aspect of what he used to be for not wanting to replace him with him again. And I just think that kind of shortens what you can do. When you start talking about only bringing in coaches that have experience, some of those coaches that have experience, they're no longer coaching for a reason. And so it would be best for you to try to find the next best, rather than just getting rid of any idea that you want to hire anybody that hasn't already been hired before. Some of the dudes are not necessarily who you want on your team anymore. Some of them dudes think the game of yesteryear, and maybe you're not going to be able to connect with some of these young guys because of that and other things. So for me, I think the right idea is to forget about what didn't work out and just solidify what you want to do now for what needs to happen in regards to your coaching situation. I think the idea of bringing in JJ Redick, potentially the next best thing, is probably the right course. It's probably the right course. It's just a risk, just like hiring anybody else is a risk. And sometimes when you hire coaches that you know aren't no good, just because they have experience, that's not a risk. That's just you hiring somebody that's never proven anything, despite having opportunities. It's not the way to go. So, yeah, I like JJ Redick, and I hope it works out for us. Obviously, we have high expectations, but on this channel, not as high as maybe others. I don't expect an NBA championship this season, but I also don't expect LeBron James to retire after this season. So there'll be another season after that. Try to go and run at it again. Hopefully, we will be in a much better position at the end of 25 to put ourselves in a position to have the type of season we want to have in 26. So it's kind of how I'm looking at it. I hate to tell Laker fans this, but this season may just be a wash off the strength of the fact that we have so many new things to kind of incorporate into our situation. So that's kind of tough when you have Bron and AD in year 7 together. You want it to work out. Or, well, not year 7 together, but Bron year 7, AD year 4 or 5, whatever it is. You want everything to work out. In a chance to get a championship is the only thing you're really doing this for. But that may be a little too unrealistic for what it is that we actually have going on right now. So I hear also that the Lakers are still interested in bringing in Donovan Mitchell. I think it would be utterly wild if they found a way to get Donovan Mitchell and Lauri Markkanen. And with Lauri Markkanen on a $17 million contract, that may actually be possible, although I don't know that to be the case. But because Lauri's making so little, one has to dream about the impossible. You know what I mean? That is what we ultimately want. So if you could put yourself in a position to have a 4-star team with Bron, AD, Lauri, and then you bringing in another guy, now you're talking about having more of a chance of being able to be good even if guys get hurt. You know, and that's really what it's all about. I think that's what Boston kind of benefits from, to be honest with you. They have some solid role players on the back of their bench that you're probably never going to see. And then the top 6 guys are really reliable, with the top 4 guys actually making all-star teams in this league. So that's kind of what I think the Lakers are trying to do. But to be honest with you, I don't know if it's necessarily feasible for them to pull it off. But listening to how they're trying to value getting a guy like Markkanen, who's basically worth half of what he's actually worth at this point. His contract is making half of what he's worth. That's probably the best bet in trying to position yourself like the Boston Celtics have, you know, without actually having everybody's bird rights. So I don't know if that's possible, but I'll tell you this. If we bring in Markkanen, the Lakers are still going to need a point guard. Let's just be honest about that. You're going to need a point guard. So however you slice it, you can be pleased with bringing in Markkanen, AD, Bron, but now you will need to turn your attention to making sure you have that guard, or else your team is not going to be very good. If you're thinking LeBron James is going to be able to facilitate for your basketball team as a primary point guard, you're putting JJ in a tough spot. You're putting him in a really tough spot. So Tyler Kolek is the point guard that I was trying to remember that is going to be taken in the back of the first round, potentially, that I thought should go to Phoenix. If for some reason the Lakers can find a way to get a point guard like that at the end of the draft, if for some reason they trade 17, that would be a win. I don't know how you get a guy like that. But that's the idea. You're going to need a facilitating point guard if you bring yourself Markkanen and D'Lo's gone, trade away 17, all that. You're not going to have a point guard. You can call Austin Reeves a point guard if you like. I don't know if he trusts his handle like that. I don't. That's the reality of it. I just don't trust his handle, man. It's not that I don't trust he can run this team. He can run a team. It's just when it really comes down to it, if you put a guy who's really good defensively on him, it's going to be a turnover. It's turnover city. That's already been proven. So I don't want him to be my primary ball handler for that reason. I'm comfortable with Austin, but there are things about Austin that need to be reassured with other aspects of the roster. You can't have a non-defensive point guard next to him. You can't have a small point guard next to him. These are different things that are just real. You can't ask him to be the facilitator, primary facilitator. It's just like, we have to make sure we have the pieces in place that complement the players we are keeping. I understand the idea of saying Rui Hachimura is a 4, so you don't want to necessarily bring yourself a Tyler Smith or Daron Sharp because you may think you already have that. But to be honest with you, I don't think you already have that, in the sense that Rui Hachimura didn't necessarily provide us the right defensive presence in those situations. Although he is rendered only a power forward, and I do think of him as a luxury power forward for what it is that I'm trying to provide myself. The key to that piece that I want to replace Bron and AD in lineups is a defensive big man. And Rui, while strong, I do not necessarily trust, as proven, to be able to step in and play their role with them. So that's kind of the issue right there. Can the player that you're asking to play that role do the things that Rui does, but be better defensively and taller than Rui? And that's why I think it's important that we try to invest in that particular type of piece in this draft, if at all possible. Tyler Smith may be that player, but I'm not 100% certain Tyler Smith is that player. I'm leaning more so Khalil Ware or Daron Sharp. But that's only because I haven't done a whole lot of homework on Tyler Smith, so I'm not really certain if he's big enough or defensive enough to do that. The key for me is, of course, having spacing on the team at all times. I'm not overly enthused with bringing myself a non-shooting big, as you guys know, even though a lot of people are huge on the idea of bringing in some of the other centers that can't necessarily shoot. I just think of them as people who are going to ultimately put more pressure on other ball handlers on our team and give us that Rudy Gobert dynamic for which does let defenses off of the hook. As I said, that they let Dallas off of the hook, in my humble opinion, in a way that Boston will not, with all the spacing that Boston provides. So that's really what it comes down to. While everybody's in love with the Rudy Gobert piece, I'm a genuine believer in the idea that Rudy Gobert is pretty much why Minnesota ain't around right now. Because he wasn't very good offensively, and then people were able to pull him away from the rim and dance on him and shoot over his head on the defensive end, even though he's supposed to be Defensive Player of the Year. So that he got to the Western Conference Finals is not a sign that I need to be trying to bring myself the next version of him. I need to try to make it so that I'm bringing myself someone who can stretch the floor, so that that dynamic that ultimately the teams that went up against Minnesota were able to benefit from is not in place. I'm not looking for, I think that was a failure. I really do. So I think a lot of people are drafting Clingan because they think he could be the next Rudy. They want to draft the other guy, the other center guy that I can't think of his name, in the back of the draft that's really strong and powerful because he could be a defensive anchor. But if he's a bad free throw shooter and he's a bad three-point shooter or a non-threat from behind the arc, then you're just shrinking the floor for your offense. For everything good he's going to do defensively, he's going to make it easy on the defense when it's time for the defense to play against you. So that's not a desirable thing. I think people are in love with that piece after having a year where those guys were considered fossils. Now that Rudy has made the Western Conference Finals, it's like, oh, those guys back in style. No, spacing is still very much in style. And if you look at the Boston Celtics and the Dallas Mavericks, you will see that the last team standing have a plethora of 7-footers that can shoot the ball and defend the perimeter. You see me? So when I think about P.J. Washington, I think about Kristaps Porzingis, think about Al Horford, think about what's the guy's name, man? I can't think of his name, but the other stretch four that got hurt in the last series that will be available for the Dallas Mavericks. Those guys shoot the three, man. They're tall guys that guard the perimeter. They shoot. They're a threat, at least from behind the arc. If the center you're bringing in is no threat, then you're probably going to find yourself in a situation where you're capped off in terms of your ceiling. I don't care how athletic, how good he rebounds, how well he sets screens and all that. You're still going to have a situation where your offensive players are dribbling their head off because the defense is crowding in because they don't have to pay him no attention. That's a dynamic with limited, talented ball handlers that you cannot afford. Now, if you got a bunch of Kyries and Steph Currys on your team who can dribble their head off, Darius Garland, guys who can dribble all day, then maybe you feel a lot better about holding on to the basketball and overcoming those defenses. But if you don't have that dynamic, and you're asking guys like Austin Reeves and LeBron James to handle the ball with defenses zoning in on them off of other guys who can't shoot, believe me, it's turnover time. It's turnover time, baby. And so that's, and not to mention if the guy can't shoot free throws, he's not on the floor down the stretch of the game, for which you probably need him. So we've talked about this already, but because of it, I'm down on the Klingons. I'm down on some of these dudes that can't shoot, man, as centers who are supposed to be defensive anchors. That's Rudy Gobert's cap. That's not real. So that's pretty much what I got to say, man. I hope people are listening. There's so much more I want to consider. So many more names that I've failed to mention because I just can't remember their names. But I can definitely see their faces. But at the end of the day, this draft is more interesting than people are giving it credit for. And I do think there are going to be some guys in that top range that are going to fall for whether good reasons or bad ones. So at 17, you could probably find value if you don't trade it away. BDL 44. I thank y'all for watching. I'm out.